So, Professor Jebb, thank you very much for joining me today. Obviously, today we're here to discuss the recent news that because of the EU exit with Britain, the amount of food coming into the country basically doesn't fit, or supposedly doesn't fit, the high quality standards of the Food Standards Agency. So the first question I'd like to ask you regarding that is, with food coming into the country that the FSA are saying doesn't meet their extremely high standards, what does this mean for the average consumer?
Well, the first thing to say is that this is data which comes out of the report we've just published on food standards in the UK, where we've looked across a whole range of issues to see whether food standards in the UK have been maintained in spite of the very turbulent times we've lived in recently, EU exit, and of course the COVID-19 pandemic. The specific issue you raise relates to import controls on foods coming from the EU. So when we were part of the EU, there were no import controls and goods were freely traded because we were all working to common standards. Now that we've left the EU, we think that there should be the same import controls for the EU as there are for the rest of the world. Now, government is very keen not to introduce friction at the borders. And so at the moment, they have decided not to impose those import controls. We found no evidence that there's been any increased risk in food coming from the EU. If you think about it, the risk the day after we left the EU was really no different than the day before we left. However, in the FSA, we're very conscious that the risk will increase over time. And over time, it's possible that the standards we have in the UK may be a bit different from the standards we have in Europe. We think that if we had import controls, we would be better able to protect consumers from potential risks. But I want to be absolutely clear, we haven't identified any increased risk. We're talking about preventing things happening in the future and ensuring that we've got the best possible systems in place to continue to protect consumers. Government's indicated they're going to set up a new system for import controls from the EU next year. We're working very closely with them, and we think that that's really important.
So, Professor Jebb, is this a worldwide issue, or is this something that at the moment is solely a UK, and I use that word in inverted commas, an issue? Is it something that, just the UK are experiencing at the moment?
It's specific to the EU-UK relationship. Our import controls on foods coming from the rest of the world are the same today as they were, last year, the year before, prior to Brexit. So it really is a very specific issue in relation to foods coming from the EU. And of course, the EU has high food standards, and we were working to the same standards until very recently. So we don't have any immediate concerns, but it's our job to look out for consumers. It's our job to protect consumers. And so what I've said in this report is that because of the lack of import controls, we simply can't promise, we can't give the same assurance that people are as well protected today as they were when we were in the EU. And it's really important we introduce import controls so we can, re-establish those even higher levels of protection.
Fantastic. So again, this may be a rather silly question in terms of obviously you pointing out that there are no real issues, but how long will this take to reverse in terms of, ensuring that the quality standards are still met in the UK? And will we see the FSA's high standards, again, use that in their high standards, will they be met again under, current guidance that is and also isn't there?
There's no reason to, we're not proposing to change our food standards. What we just need is import controls so that we can put those checks in place. It's perhaps helpful to say, what do we mean by import controls? And there are really two things. One is that what we would like is for, let's take animal products coming from the EU into the UK. We would like controls which mean that those have to be signed off by usually a vet or certainly a professional within the EU. So they take professional responsibility for saying, yes, this food can be exported to the UK because it meets the UK's food standards. And at the moment, we don't have that assurance. The second thing we'd like to be able to do if we had import controls is if we did have concerns about a shipment, we would be able to stop it at the border. And so essentially it's just 2 layers of protection which are not there. There are other systems, there are other ways of protecting consumers, and we've done everything we can to do that. So it's important to get the risk in proportion.
And the final question I'll ask you then, Professor Jebb, on this topic is, what would you say to anyone who has read this study and is potentially worried about the, again, quote unquote, decline of quality of food that's coming into the UK? What would you say to them to sort of put their minds at rest and reinforce that this really isn't as big as an issue as maybe some people might think?
In the UK, we are rightly proud of having really high food standards, and our domestic production is at a wonderful level. That hasn't changed. The food we import from the rest of the world hasn't changed. And even the food we import from Europe today is probably not very different from a year ago. The EU has very high food standards. There is not an immediate risk. And the FSA has, as I said, put in place a number of systems so that if our intelligence tells us there's a concern about, chicken coming from a particular country, then we've got other ways of stepping in to protect people. So I really don't want consumers to be concerned about this. What I do want is for policymakers and others in government to understand that these import controls do need to be introduced next year, and they are an important layer in our safety mechanisms, but they're just one layer, they're not the whole thing.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that, Professor Jebb. Is there anything you would like to add that maybe I haven't covered? For example, looking at how maybe local authorities or local governments can try and curtail this issue?
So our annual report, I think, is an absolute, treasure trove of data about food standards in the UK. Mostly, we were really pleased to see that standards have been maintained over the last couple of years. But we do highlight import controls. The other area where we've got some concerns is around the capacity in local authorities to inspect food businesses in their area. So again, this is an important part of keeping food safe and making sure that food is what it says it is. And environmental health officers working for local authorities are absolutely vital in that. They go out and inspect food businesses. Many people will be familiar with the 1 to 5 score that you see, which is the food hygiene rating. And that's done by environmental health officers. We know from our data that there's been a bit of a decline in the number of inspections that have been done. There's a bit of a backlog building up. We're working very closely with local authorities to recover. They're on track, but there's still more work to do. And they need the resource to be able to do that. And to be honest, we also need to attract more people into the profession of being environmental health officers, which is actually a fascinating career. I've learned so much going out with them as they do their job. So that's our other slight worry. But again, I would say it's not something people should be concerned about themselves as individuals. What I want them to know is that I, as chair of the FSA and the FSA board, are looking out for this. It's on our radar and we're keeping a really close eye on what's going on. And we'll report again next year. So we'll all be able to see in a very open and transparent way how everyone's getting on.
Professor Susan Jebb, thank you very much for your time.
Great to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you.